We'll do a review in the Kutes Sichas in Chelek Chov Gimel, volume 23. This is the first Sicha for the Parsha of Pinchas. This is a Rashi Sicha. In the Parshas Bamidbar, we find 3 times in which the Jewish people didn't know a certain halacha, what they needs to be done. And then they went and they asked by Moshe Rabbeinu and by the others in the portion of Pinchas, our portion. Over there we find that the daughters of Tzlofchad, who wanted a portion in the land of Israel, they didn't have any brothers. So they came before Moshe, before Elazar HaKohen. Earlier in the Parshas Shlach, we also learned that in the first Parshas Wolosow, that when Hashem told them to make the Korban Pesach, and there were people that wanted to that couldn't make the first Pesach because they were Tamei, and they came and they argued to Moshe. So again, over there, they came before Moshe to ask what to do. And then also in the portion of Shlach, there's the portion of the Mekoshish Eitzim, the guy who was collecting the wood on Shabbos, where they came before Moshe. Now, what does it say? So we'll start with our pasuk over here because this is the Parshas Pinchas. So from pasuk in Parshas B'nai Tzlofchad, in the portion of the daughters of Tzlofchad, so the pasuk says, "V'ta'amoidna lifnei Moshe v'lifnei Elazar hakohanim v'lifnei Anisim v'chol ha'eda." So the pasuk enumerates here that they stood, the daughters of Tzlofchad, they came before Moshe. And when you read the pasuk, you can read it as they came before Moshe. And then they came with Lifnei Elazar HaKohen, they came before Elazar HaKohen. And then you can with Lifnei Anisim, then they came to the leaders. And then they came before Ha'edah, before the whole community. And they came Pesach in front of the tent of meeting to ask about that they wanted an inheritance in the land of Eretz Yisrael. So this way of learning, that this was one after the other, first Lifnei Moshe and then Lifnei Elazar HaKohen, this is possibly to learn in all these 3 cases, in the Parshas Pinchas, in the Parshas Wolosow, and the Parsha of Shlach, because in all of these psukim there is the potential to read that you came to the first one and then you went to the next one once you weren't satisfied by the first one. And if you weren't satisfied by the second one, you went to the third one. But in the Sifri, in all of these 3 cases, it brings down 2 opinions. One opinion says that this was the way that it took place, that you went to the first one and then you went further on. The other opinion says, no, they asked them while they were all together. They wasn't asking one, then the next one, because as the argument goes, if they came to Moshe, Moshe didn't know the answer. How did Elazar HaKohen know the answer? And the Rebbe is going to discuss the Rashi here, that why Rashi, in the Sifri, he's consistent. In all 3 cases, it brings the machlokes, whether it means that you asked one after the other, or it asked them all together in all 3 places. And then the Rashi, surprisingly, has it one way in our parsha. Rashi brings both opinion. In the Parshas Wolosow, Rashi just brings the opinion that you ask them all together. And in the Parshas Shlach, it doesn't say anything. But that's what we're going to discuss here. So bringt sich in Sifri, it brings a plukta, a disagreement in a Pirush HaPosuk. What is the meaning of the Posuk? And quoting, it says, they brought to Moshe and then Elazar and before Elazar HaKohen. If you read it simply we have a problem. How could it be they brought it to Moshe, and then how would Elazar know? If Moshe didn't know, and that's why they had to go further, Elazar would know. How would he know? Moshe doesn't know the answer. So the first opinion says you got to turn the verse around and expound it, that as if it would be saying that they stood before the Kol Ha'edah, in front of the Nesiim, and then they went to Lozer HaKohen, and finally they went to Moshe Rabbeinu. You have to switch and turn the pasuk around so that it will fit that they came to Moshe after not that they came to the others after they asked Moshe, and Moshe didn't know. So that's one interpretation. That's the interpretation of Rabbi Yoshia. Abba Chonon would say differently. No, it's not like the pasuk is not meant one after the other. They were sitting in the study hall. They were all in the study hall. And they came. The daughters of Tzlafchat came and stood before them. And the exact same thing is in the other two times that we have in the Chumash Bamidbar, both in the Parsha of Ba'aloischa and Shlach, where the Sifri brings down the same machlokes. The Zelbe Plukta werd gebracht in Sifri. The same disagreement is brought in the Sifri in noch zwei in additional two places. Number one, Aleph, in Parshas Pesach Sheni, in Parshas Ba'aloischa. In the portion in which they asked to bring the second Pesach because they couldn't bring the first one, which is in the Parshas Ba'aloischa, from Pasik, Vayikrevu lifnei Moshe v'lifnei Aaron. So over there, when the people that couldn't bring the Korban Pesach came to Moshe and to Aaron, so there also he brings them the machlokes Moshe and Aaron. How could it be? So we have to either, Rabbi Yoshia says we have to switch around. First they came to Aaron and then they went to Moshe. And according to Rabbi Abba Chanan, they asked them both together. That's in the Parshas Ba'aloischa. The same thing is numbered in other cases in the portion of Shalach, in Parshas Mekoshes Eitzim, in the portion where they collected the wood, which is the Parshas B'Shalach. From Pasuk on the verse, Vayakrivu Oisoi El Moshe Vel Ariv El Koleido. They didn't know exactly what to do with the one who violated the Shabbos by collecting the wood on Shabbos. They knew that he'd get this death penalty, but they didn't know exactly how, what form of death penalty. So it says also Vayakriv El Moshe Vel Ariv El Koleido. So they brought the Mekoshesh Eitzim to Moshe El Koleido over there too. According to Rabbi Yoshia, the Sifri says it means that we have to switch it. That first they brought the Kol Ha'edah Aaron, and then they brought to Moshe, and you have to turn it. And according to Abba Chanan, they were asked when they were all together, because it doesn't make sense to have asked Moshe and then go to the others, because if Moshe doesn't know, how would the others know? But then let's look at the Rashi. And here we see something surprising in the Rashi. In Parshas Ba'aloischa, the first time, in the portion of Ba'aloischa, by the Pesach Sheni, is a Mefarish Lifnei Moshe v'Lifnei Aaron. The Pasuk says that they brought Vayakriv Moshe Lifnei Aaron. So he says Lifnei Moshe Lifnei Aaron. So Rashi says simply, like the opinion of Abba Chanan, as they were both sitting in the Beis Medrash, they came and they asked him. And Rashi further says, this is in Parashat Ba'aloischa. It's not possible to say they came one after the other. Then they came to Moshe and then they came to Aaron. Because if Moshe didn't know, how would Aaron know? So that means in Parshas Ba'aloischa, Nemtar on bepashtus kidas Abba Chanan. He accepts that literally, in the simple meaning, like the opinion of Abba Chanan. That's in the Parshas Behaloischa. In the Parshas Shlach, however, Rashi doesn't say anything. When they wanted to figure out what to do with the Megoshish Eitzim, who was collecting wooden Shabbos, so it says they brought to Moshe Aaron Koleido in Parshas Shlach. Is Rashi going to Mefarish? Rashi doesn't explain anything. And in Unzer Parsha, in our portion, in which we talk about the Bnei Slavchod, bring Beide Deis, he brings both opinions to B'Shem Emra, and he quotes who said it. So why is Rashi not consistent? Over there he says the first pshat Abachonon. Here it says both. Shlach says nothing. So the fact that in Shlach he says nothing, that's not such a question, because we can say that he's relying on the parsha before, in Parshas Behaloischa, in which he already explained that he asked them both when they were sitting in the Beis Medrash. Those was Rashi is Gornit Mefarish in Parshas Shlach. The fact that Rashi doesn't explain anything in the portion of Shlach, we can answer this. As verlost sich am gedenken sein Pirush, in the Friedrich said that Rashi relies that you will remember his commentary in the previous portion, the portion of Behaloischa. So that's why he doesn't bring anything. But those was Parsha say no break their Beide Deis. But the fact that in our Parsha he brings both opinions, B'Shem Emram, and he still says who said it, is in Ganze nicht verstandig. That's totally not understood. So from them was Rashi bring the Parshas Behaloischa nor dem Pirush Kshishneim Yeshua. The fact that Rashi brings in the portion of Behaloischa only one commentary, only the commentary where they're both sitting, is mumon. It's understood as blows the Pirush for Abachonon that it's only the interpretation of Abachonon is masim and pshuta shel mikra. It fits in the simple meaning of the pasuk. That's why Rashi just brings down that opinion. And it's also logical why Abachonon's opinion is the closest to the simple meaning of the pasuk, because to switch around the pasuk, like Rabbi Yoshia says, isn't so simple. So we go like Abachonon. That's why Rashi says there that they were both together. It's also understood simply as Sare says Amikra, to go ahead and switch around the words in the pasuk. The pasuk it says they came to Moshe and Aaron, and we're going to say that it first came to Aaron and to Moshe. That is nit galatik im shuter shel mikra, in the simple meaning of the pasuk. That's not so smooth. Rabbi Yeshua and his magish. Look in the words in Rabbi Yeshua's words. He says, "Saris mikra v'darshay." You have to expound it, switch around the pasuk and expound it. So that means it's a drash. It's not pshat. As medaf onkum to derech drash, that you need to come on. That's the way, a style of drash, but not Rashi Pshuta Mikra. So we understand the reason. So in Behaloischa we understand, but we don't understand how come in our parsha Rashi brings down both opinions and he brings the other opinion first. But on the other hand, this commentary in our parsha, the Baal that bring Beide Deis, since he brings both opinion, is muchach, so that's evident. As das Rabbi Yeshua is behesed to pshuta shel mikra. That also the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua that we have to switch around the pasuk fits in the simple meaning of the pasuk. So over there it seems like the only other one. Here it seems like both fit into the pasuk. And not only do they all fit, Rashi brings here the first opinion of Rabbi Yeshua that we have to move around the pasuk, because it was one by one. He asked Aaron, and he asked the others, and then he went back to Moshe. This still is noch starker. This contradiction is even more difficult. Was Rabbi Yoshi's Pirush is noch magdim zum Pirush von Abachonon. That Rashi proceeds to bring first the interpretation of Rabbi Yoshia, and then he brings the other one. So he brings it first before Abachonon. In Behaloischa, he just brings Abachonon. And over here in Pinchas, he brings first Rabbi Yoshia and then Abachonon. And we were trying to say that Abachonon's shot seems to be more Pshuta Shel Mikra, And that's why Rashi brings the Baloischa. But then what are we going to do over here when Rashi brings both Pirushim and he brings Rabbi Yeshia's first? Brings Rabbi Yeshia's first. And furthermore, how many things do we have to swap around? Over here, it turns we'll have to swap around 4 things because they spoke to 4. Over there, it's Moshe and Aaron. So it's not so much Saras. You have to just say, instead of coming to Moshe and Aaron, you came to Aaron and Moshe. But over here, you got to go through the whole list. Moshe and Elazar, Nisiyeido, Choleido, Nochmer. Parshas Baloischa state, Nor Lifnei Moshe Lifnei Aaron. Over there, when they came Moshe and Aaron. So when you have to be Mesaris, you have to switch around the pasuk with Mela. Darf man bloß mahapich sein dem Seder von zwei. Then it's only necessary to swap the order of 2. To say that first Aaron and then Moshe. Mashenki be Parsha Seder vo state, but in our Parsha it says they came Lifnei Moshe, Lifnei Elazar HaKohen, Lifnei HaNesim. And for the Nesim, there's 3. All the Eidos that come to us, as the Sirus HaMikra has been a gay drive, it's with regards to 3, Nesim, Elazar, and Moshe. And yet, when Afal Pikein, and yet bring Rashi the Pirush Rabbi Yeshua Davkeda. So yet Rashi brings the interpretation of Rabbi Yeshua over here in this pasuk, which you have to do more switching around, 3 times switching around. And Rashi brings that as the first. And in Parshas Baloischa, where you only have to switch around 2, he doesn't bring Rabbi Yossi at all, and only brings Rabbi Chaim. In Ois Beis, the Rebbe tries to find a distinction why in Parshas Baloischa it makes more sense to say that they were both sitting in the base medrash, because of the pasuk says v'chol ha'eda, and what was kol ha'eda doing in base medrash? Meila in Parshas Baloischa, where it says just Moshe and Aaron, makes more sense over there to say that they were in the base medrash because Moshe and Aaron is in base medrash. But in our pasuk in Pinchas, in which the Torah also says that they addressed the Nesiim and Chol Ha'eda, where would the Chol Ha'eda be doing in the base medrash? So maybe that's why it's not so pashtusdik to say that they met them in the base medrash. But the Rebbe says that Chol Ha'eda over here means the people really that were interested in learning Torah that were there anyways. It doesn't mean all of the Eidah. Let's look inside. And in Ois Gimel, the Rebbe is going to further try to make another distinction. Let's go there. So, Beis L'Choyre Ot Men Gekent Masbir Zayin. It would seem that you could explain as the Shinu Tzvishu the Tzvei Pirushi Rashi, that the difference between these 2 commentaries of Rashi in Parshas Baloischa and in Parshas Seinu, in the portion of Baloischa and our Parsha, is verbunden mit the Shinu Haloshen in the Psukim, that it's connected to the change of language in these verses. In Parshas Baloischa steht nor Lifnei Moshe v'Lifnei Aaron. In the portion of Baloischa, it only states Moshe and Aaron, Lifnei Moshe and Aaron. There's only the 2 of them. Is the Rebbe Mistaber, so that's why it's logical. Loit makes it's fitting that Loit Pshutoshel Mikra in the simple meaning of the pasuk. So Mefarer Zayin Ksheshneim Yoshim Beis HaMedrash Chulu, when they were both sitting in the Beis Medrash, because that's where they were, in the Beis Medrash. When we talk about just Moshe and Aaron, so that makes sense to Mefarer Zayin Ksheshneim Yoshim Beis HaMedrash Chulu, when they're sitting in the Beis HaMedrash, because Moshe and Aaron, they were in Beis Medrash. That's where they belong. As opposed to in our parsha, in the Pinchas over here, where the pasuk is Moshe, the pasuk also adds B'chol Ha'eda. So it wasn't just Moshe and Elazar but it was also Kol Eda. Is that far? Of course, over here we're talking about Elazar because Aaron passed away already. So, but Elazar also belongs in the base medrash, but it also says Kol Eda. Is Rashi done nit mefarish? That's what Rashi does not explain. The pirush Rishon ve'ikri in the first and main pirush, as the base medrash that they were sitting in the base medrash. But Pashtus is nichaychas Kol Eda is in the base medrash, because simply it doesn't really fit that the entire Eda should be in the base medrash. But the Rebbe says, "Be'emes kemen over azoinit lernen." You can't say that. Actually, the Kol Eda doesn't mean here literally all the community. It means the people that were interested in learning. It means the Sanhedrin, as Rebbe proves from another Rashi. Be'emes kemen azoinit lernen. Weil levatzois. Besides that, so if that was the case, we need an explanation. Why doesn't Rashi say anything in Parshas Bahaloischo? Because over there, you can't say that he was relying in Parshas Shlach. Before we said because he was relying on Parshas Bahaloischo. But now, in Parshas Shlach, it says El Kol Ha'eda. And we're saying when it says El Kol Ha'eda, it doesn't really, can't say like the first shot, because what are they doing in the base medrash? So then we will have a problem with the Parshas Shlach. According to this, it becomes difficult again. Why Rashi does not caution us and answer anything the portion of Shlach, is the pasuk Moshe, because since there too the verse adds al Moshe velare vel Kol Ha'eda, so there's also al Kol Ha'eda there too, in addition to Moshe Nare. So therefore, because it says el Kol Ha'eda in Parshas Shlach, so you can't say like we're saying Kinal Azef Alosich. I will try to say earlier that he's relying on Zampirush in Parshas Ba'alischa, Sheyeshim Bebeis HaMedrash, and they're sitting Beis HaMedrash, because we're just saying when it says Kol Ha'eda, what is Kol Ha'eda doing in Beis Medrash? So besides that, we have that difficulty now with the Parshas Shlach again. Is Noisef Lazeh Kosher. It's difficult, and besides that, it's difficult. Because you can't say that that's why it says that we call Kol Ha'eda is the problem. Rashi Aleinu Beferish Gizok in Soy Parshas Tisa. Rashi himself says in the end of the portion of Kisisa. So Rashi over there said Beferish Gizok in Soy Parshas Kisisa. Ketzad Seder HaMishnah. How did the order of the Mishnah learn with Moshe Rabbeinu? Nichnasu kol ha'om. All the people who came in. What does that mean? Does haste. As in the Ord Beis HaMedrash, that in the place where the Beis HaMedrash, there where Moshe had learned Torah mit Yidden, where Moshe was teaching Torah, learning, studying with the Yidden, Zayin Narayin kol ha'om, the entire people went in. Is doch b'meila ich bin in the Danking Kash in it. So therefore, in our case, if Kol Ha'om went in there, it's not a question. How did the whole community go into the Beis HaMedrash, just like over there? Yeah, but what's the pshat really? The Tambazeh. It's not Kol Ha'eda. It means the interest in the Sanhedrin, Kol Ha'eda. Kol Ha'om, and Azoich Kol Ha'eda, make nit alle Yidden mamish. This does not mean all Yidden. Nor die welche haben gewollt lernen ukayetzubai, those who wanted to study and similar. But B'meila is nitoki Schwierigkeit, so there is really no difficulty with Father Zayin. Azay alle, that all of them, Moshe by us, Moshe Elazar, the Nesiim, and Kol Ha'eda Zayin given Beis HaMedrash, and the leaders were together with the Kol Ha'eda. Kol Ha'eda means the interested party, the Sanhedrin, or those who wanted to be in Beis Medrash. That's the Kol Ha'eda, that's the Kol Ha'om. Nochmer, in unser Post is noch glatter zu einlernen as the Beis HaMedrash HaYeshua. Over here the language is Eda versus Om. By us, it's even easier to interpret that this means that we're sitting in the base medrash, because the Eidah, Adosh Teid the Loshon Kol HaEidah. Doesn't mean Kol Ha'om is the Eidah, not Kol Ha'om. Rashi explained earlier already, come upon many times, as Kol HaEidah and Eichmein and nor the Sanhedrin. That Kol HaEidah could mean only the Sanhedrin, even though it says Kol HaEidah, but it means the Sanhedrin. So since over here it could mean the Sanhedrin, means the Sanhedrin. So therefore, so our question comes back to its place. How come Rashi does not explain also here like before, as beis hamedrash they were sitting in the beis medrash, als pirush rishon v'ikli, as the first and the main pirush. Why does Rashi bring here two pirushim and the other pirush, Rabbi Yoshia's pirush, that to switch around the posik brings it as a first? The Rebbe brings another difference between the Parshas Pinchas and the Parshas Wolosow, which could maybe be another clue difference, because over there in Parshas Pinchas it says where they met. Doesn't say where they met. By us, it says Pesach El Moed. Doesn't say Beis Medrash. When you say you came to Moshe and Aaron, it's easier to say came to Beis Medrash. But in Pesach El Moed, what kind of Beis Medrash? They were outside of the tent of meeting. It was no Beis Medrash over there. That's why Rashi has a harder time explaining that over here in Parshas Pinchas that it wasn't the Beis Medrash. But the Rebbe says fakert. The Beis Medrash was Pesach Oil Moed. Rashi says the Sanhedrin was sitting next to the Pesach Oil Moed. Let's look inside. Gimel says, there's another change between the verse in our parsha and the posik of Parshas Wolosow and the verse in the portion of Wolosow. Was der Mitvot man lechayri gekent mevair sein dem tam? That way we could have explained the reason for was Rashi is domishana for Zavridikum Pirush, why Rashi changes here from his previous commentary. In Parshas Wolosow wird nicht angedeutet. In Parshas Wolosow it's not specified, it's not pointed out in Pasuk in the verse, Vu Moshe Ba'adon Zayin given, where Moshe not in war. So therefore, the River can Rashi Taich, and that's why Rashi could translate when they were both sitting in the base medrash. That's when they came and they asked them. Oh, but in unser parsha, but in our portion, steht befedish in Pasuk. It says befedish as they Zayin given, that they were Pesach Oil Moed by the entrance of the Oil Moed. Kem and Zogum, so that we can say, as the Far will Rashi nit lernen. That's why Rashi does not want to learn the Pirusha Orisha Vayikra in his first and main Pirush. As the base medrash, that they were sitting in the base medrash, because here it clearly says that we're Pesach Oil Moed. So maybe that's why Rashi doesn't want to learn it as the first pshat. But that explanation is not sufficient. Violent. Aleph, the pashtus simply zayin a Pesach Oil Moed the Beis HaMedrash. The entrance of the Oil Moed and the Beis HaMedrash were both in the same place. Pesach Oil Moed means Vert Gemeenter Chotzer HaMishkan. Pesach Oil Moed means the courtyard of the Mishkan. Und euch der Beis HaMedrash is given in Chotzer HaMishkan. So the Beis HaMedrash was also in the courtyard of the Mishkan. Leb Mizbeach was near the Mizbeach. Rashi sagt in Onheb from Parshas Mishpatim. Rashi is the beginning of portion of Mishpatim. Shatosim Sanhedrin, it's a Mizbeach. Place the Sanhedrin next to the Mizbeach. The Meile Kemen Zogun as Pesach Oil Moed mean the Beis HaMedrash. It could mean that Pesach Oil Moed means Beis HaMedrash. That shouldn't be a problem. Beis. Okay, if Rashi can't say Beis HaMedrash, let him just say wherever they were. We don't even have to say Pesach HaMoed. We said when they were all together. That's when he asked them all together. Beis, I feel him Tzaloimar. Even if you're going to argue, you're going to say, as we can zogen as der posik so mit Pesach Oil Moed meinen Beis Hamedrash. That this posik, when it says Pesach Oil Moed, cannot mean Beis Hamedrash. Is Hogufa time a boy? So first of all, that needs a reasoning. Va'oid, why Taka does it say that? But we need a reasoning. Va'oid, what is that hechel b'chlal? What is that forces us, according to this interpretation, to mefarer zayin b'beis hamedrash? Why do we have to say specifically the word of Beis Hamedrash? You have to say that. You just want to say that we're all together. Rashi should have said, as before, Lifnei kulam amdu. Not with the Beis Hamedrash, they were before of all them. Umudos is given, and where it was, the pasuk says Pesach Hayomayim. Rashi doesn't even have to say where it was. So, why does Rashi not bring? Bottom line is the first, like he said in Parshas Wolosow, that they were in the Beis Medrash or they were in front of all of them, and that way that should come first. And Rashi over here brings the Pinchas Rabbi Yoshua that we switch around the pasuk, and only the second second shot we bring down what Rashi, the same as Rashi said in Bahalos. So the Rebbe explains now that the key to Rashi's explanation in Parshas Bahaloischa that is that they were in the Beis Hamedrash. That the reason why Aaron was involved and together with Moshe wasn't just because they were physically, Moshe and Aaron were together in the Beis Medrash, but it was because the Beis Medrash part, because a Beis Medrash, as the Rebbe will explain in the next ois, is a place where they everybody is there to listen and to give an opinion, and therefore they are both asked the question. In other words, we know that it can't be zeh achar zeh. They can't be asking one after the other one. But how do you ask them together? You ask them together in the Beis Medrash, which each one of them is being asked, not one after the other, but at the same time. That is how they're being asked. And that's why it's not a question how does one know, because they're asked together. They're asked together in a way that each individual is being asked, but they're asked in the Beis Medrash. Let's look inside. Let me verstehen kol anal. Will understand all the above. Bahagdim habiyur in klolus hadiyuk, by first explaining the question, the diuk, which says, Im Moshe loy hoye yodeya. If Moshe didn't know, how would Aaron know? How would Elazar know? In our Rashi over there, how would Aaron know? How would Elazar know if Moshe didn't know? So what do you see? You see from Rashi that each one of them was asked separately. And the question is, if Moshe didn't know, how would the other one know? From Pirush Rashi is mashma. From Pirush Rashi, it's understood as pshat loshen hakosuv is mechiach, that the simple language, the literal language of the pasuk is proves as the ashayla, that the question, the anoshim asher hoyu, those is in Parshas Bahaloischa, those that were tamil nefesh, and also von der Bnei Slavchad in our Parsha is gefragt geworden by jedern von den Nisholim Bazunder. It was asked from each one separately. But when you ask each one separately, because you're saying, Moshe lo hayedei, how would he know? Which means that he was asked first. But that means, but we see that each one was asked individually. Aber in dem can sein zwei Pfannen. But there can be two ways how you ask individually. So when we say that you set them together, it doesn't mean that you didn't ask each one separate, but you can ask separate when you ask together, as Rebbe explains. Each one was asked for jeden von den Nisholim Bazunder, but in them can sein zwei Pfannen. But there can be two ways of asking separate. B'dibur echad b'bas achas. You could say one word at once and ask two separate people at the same time. The other way would be zachar zeh, would be one after the other. Rashi wants to tell you it's not zeh achar zeh, but it's still each one individually was asked, but not in a way of zachar zeh. Zachar zeh doesn't work here because after Moshe doesn't know, how would Elazar know? How would Ari know? So we're saying that each one was asked separate, but in one dibur. Was der Faris noch dem wie Rashi hat beparshas behaloischa befarish given. So therefore, after Rashi in the Parsha explained, Isheshneihem yoshvim bebeis hamedrash bo v'sholum. So Rashi says that they were both beis medrash. That should have been sufficient. But Rashi continues over there in Parshas Ba'aloischa, Izer Marich, nit b'darke b'kol mokem, not as he usually. Rashi goes through a great length, and Rashi says together, and he says to shoylo zayin ha'oifen de zachar zeh. He says, but not one after the other. Why? Because Rashi is meant to say they were still individually asked, but not one after the other, but asked in one dibur, each one individually. Is a matter that Shushelu Zayin Ha'ofen the Zachar Zeh. He's only saying it wasn't one after the other, but they were still asked individually. What does Rashi say in Parshas Ba'aloischa after saying they were in Beis HaMedrash? He says, "V'lo yitochen loimer Zachar Zeh." We can't say one after the other. She Moshe lo yodei arim menayin lo. Also in our parsha that Rashi, where Bavorn bepirushe efsheri Moshe lo yoda leEzer yedea. Could it possibly Moshe doesn't know and Ezer knows? So we're trying to say it wasn't zeh achar zeh, it wasn't zachar zeh, but as we'll see, it was bebas achas because it wasn't beis medrash. And when you ask in a beis medrash, you can ask Aaron and Moshe at the same time. And if it's not Zachar Zeh, it's not a problem. And the Rebbe adds, we say to Mizu, Nochdem Birashi Bipirushim Parsein in our Parsha is mighty from Posik Lifnei Moshe. He says Lifnei Moshe. Is there Mamshich Moisif? Rashi continues and adds and says ve'achar kach lifnei Elazar. He adds the words and afterwards lifnei Elazar. Was yesh loymar. Say as der mit is Rashi oisen zu madgish sein. That Rashi intention here is to emphasize as der word vilifnei main punkt ve'as volt stein in posik. The word vilifnei is as if it would say in the verse The achar kach lifnei Elazar, that afterwards before Elazar. So when the pasuk says lifnei, the lifnei means the pashtus of the pasuk is that he asked them individually, and but it was done by basachas. That's how come you have it. As we'll see, be a shloimer has but it is. So what's the explanation? Why is Rashi saying it in this way, that it was achar kach? Who says it was afterwards? It just says lifnei. Then, because that's why Pasuk says lifnei and lifnei. The word lifnei is interrupt, tells us that it's afterward. Then in Pasuk Vod Gishtanen lifnei Moshe ve'Aaron, in front of Moshe and Aaron. Balderach ze lifnei Moshe ve'Elazar gomer in our Pasuk lifnei Moshe ve'Aaron in Parshas Ba'al Yisrael, and lifnei Moshe ve'Aaron over here in our Parsha. Both given move on, then it would be understood as the shaila is gefragt geworden ein mol, that this question was asked once, wasn't asked the second time. Far Moshe zeinig mit Aaron Yetzibah. It was Moshe when he was with Aaron. Das can eich hasten. That could still be called, if it would say Moshe Aaron, it can be called that it can still mean it was just a one-time question. It wasn't the achakach, another question. While he was in the presence with Aaron. That's why it says if name Moshe ve'Aaron. That would make sense still if it would not say the lifnei. Those can euch heißen as the shaila is gefragt geworden beikir by Moshe. It mean also that the question was mainly asked by Moshe. Und das was es wird der Mond euch Aaron okay jetzt, why do we mention also Aaron and Elazar is nor weil b'metzias is damals given zusammen mit Moshe, because he, in fact was he was together with Moshe. That is if we would say that they spoke to Moshe ve'Aaron. Bald over as the pasuk sagt abazunder lifnei. There was another time said lifnei v'lifnei Aaron, not ve'Aaron, but in front of Aaron. Bald there said v'lifnei Elazar gomer. Is those machriach Rashi to learn? That forces Rashi to learn as the shaila is gefragt geworden bazunder by Aaron und Elazar v'chulu, that it was asked separately by Aaron and Elazar. The bald. Okay, so the first thing is we see that each one got the question individually. But since as lo yitochen loymar zeh achar zeh, well, we can't say one follows. They were asked separately, but how are you going to say one after the other? You can't say that. Lifi haseder shebiksuvim. If you go by the order who was asked first, they were asked separately. And if you go by the order of the psukim, as Nachum fragen by Moshe, after they asked Moshe, not make gefragt by Aaron, then they came and asked by Aaron. And that's not possible. So how does Rashi explain it? The Rebbe Dr. Rashi, Kishashneim Yoshvim, the Beis HaMedrash. The key is here they were both sitting in Beis HaMedrash. Bo v'sholom. That's when they asked them. Was in them oifen, in the way that they're sitting in Beis HaMedrash, is the shaila gewendet zu Aaron Punkt zu Moshe. Then the question is asked to Aaron just like to Moshe. It'll come on as the Rebbe will explain, and therefore it's take lifnei. It's separately because it's when you do it bebas achas ze achar ze bebas achas as it's b'dibur echad, one speech, but it's still separate. But we can't say that first Moshe as the pasuk and Aaron, or Moshe and Wolosow. That's why we have the other dipshat that when they were together. As the Rebbe will explain in Oisei. Beis HaMedrash is an ort wo man lernt Torah zusammen. This medrash is a place where you study together in a group. Nicht an Ort wo Eden versammeln sich zu hören Torah. It's not a place where Jews gather to listen to Torah, halacha or laws, hadrosha, expoundings of kiyotzebe from a chochem, or similarly from a sage. Das heißt, which means Hagam as in Beis HaMedrash is Faran. Arov, even though there is a Rav, and there is a Rosh Yeshiva, head of the Yeshiva Kiyotzebe, ohne seinen dort Talmid, when they're students, und zwischen the Talmidim go for seinen dort Chilukim v'Malosim, and amongst the students itself, there is different levels in their greatness. Afal became, and yet is that the Inyan from Beis HaMedrash, the idea of Beis HaMedrash, as alle Yoshvei Beis HaMedrash, that all those that sit in the Beis HaMedrash, seinen sich mishtatev in the limud, they all participate in the study. Heron the Shaila, they listen to the question, Shaklevatari, the debate, they give and take in ear about the discussion. They're all into discussion, etc. So the fun is euch muvon. So from this we also understand as Shailas welchen werden gefragt in Beis HaMedrash, that those questions that are being asked in Beis HaMedrash, seine beöfen schöne wie die Shailas was man fragt, they're different than the questions that are asked in Koim Yeshivas Bezdin, a place where the Bezdin sits, or you ask by a Rav, because B'shas mefrekt a Shaila by Bezdin, when you ask a question by Bezdin, or a Dayan, or a judge, a Rav, or a Rabbi, a Filu, then the Rabbi Shtein Talmidim, even if there are students that are standing there, is mubon as the Shaila when gefrekt davke by Bezdin. It's understood that that question is asked the Bezdin. Masheik and Shaila was when gefrekt by Beis HaMedrash, but a question as opposed to a question which is asked in the study hall, is a given that then it's directed not to Rosh Beis HaMedrash, not to the head of the Beis HaMedrash, the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the Yeshiva Kiyotzbe, nor to alle Yoshve Beis HaMedrash, for all those that sit in the Beis HaMedrash. So they sagen alle me'ain bashvar. They all look into it equally. All the question is presented in Beis Medrash, and everybody equally looks into the matter. And everybody can say their opinion. Und das sagt Rashi, Rashi says, Shneim Yeshu beBeis HaMedrash Bo v'Shalom. When they were both sitting in the Beis Medrash, that's when they came and asked him. Those was Aaron, or Geher the Shailas. The reason that Aaron heard the question is that their far was a Zainen Beide given. That was because they both were on the Leren Torah zusammen in the Beis HaMedrash, and they were studying Torah together in the Beis HaMedrash. Was der Riber hat man die Shaila gefragt in themselves and even by Zebeda. They asked them both the question. It was Lifnei Moshe, before Moshe, but Lifnei Aaron, and before Aaron. Not later, but before him. He was presented at the same time, that same question. Because they're both there. Well, the Asbora Bashteido Ka'amur, because the explanation is, as said, in them was his Anagivem Bebeis HaMedrash. Over here, the explanation is they were in the study hall, well, not in the Prata Zanagivem Zusammen, not that they were together. It's not because they were there together, it was because they were in the study hall. So, in our Parsha, it's quite obvious that they were Pesach Oyel Moyed, where was the gathering where people came to listen to the instructions of Moshe. It's not a place, it's not mashma that is a place where everybody is equal, and therefore Rashi has a hard time explaining to here in the first shot Lifnei Moshe Lifnei that it was in the study of Abizeh is verstandig. Was beParsha Seinu nemt Rashi nit on them pirush. Why Rashi does not accept that interpretation als pirush Rishon ve'ikri as the first and the main pirush of that they taught them together, but Rashi explains like Rabbi Yoshia that they to switch the pasuk. Rashi learns as mit Pesach Oil Moed, when the Torah says Pesach Moed is the pasuk, is nicht azoi zu anweisen dem Ort. It's not so much to point to the place. Who's is eine given? Where they happen? So they have L'mainaf Kimena. What difference does it make? It was Pesach Oil Moed. Why do we need to know that? So Nordos is metayer bi-iker. This is mainly describing wie sie seinen dort given versammelt, how they were gathered. That the gathering was in such a way. Pesach Oyel Moed. They came to the entrance of Oyel Moed, which is their ort. That was the spot. The place was Kol Ha'eda Kleibt sich zusammen. The entire community gathers together. Nicht aufsetzen sich lernen zusammen. That's not a place where people sit down to learn together. Nor auf zu hören, was Moshe Rabbeinu wird sie sagen, but to hear that which Moshe Rabbeinu will tell them. So it turns out, as in unser Posik is the Pshutei need that Inyan from the Beis Medrash Hoyu. That in our Posik, in the simple meaning, it was not the idea of Beis Medrash. No Pesach HaMoed, the Pesach HaMoed coming to listen to the instructions of Hashem Kenal Hoyu. Over there they were. Now, the Rebbe says, could be that Moshe and Aaron or Moshe and Elazar and the Messiah were in the Beis Medrash, and the Chol Ha'eda was by the Pesach HaMoed to see what happens, but that's a doichek. The doichek can man sagen, on a squeeze, you can say, as Pesach HaMoed is sein Teuchen als Amokim HaKahola. Pesach HaMoed, the idea, the content, that's a place where you gather together, Batzitzich Blois. That only refers to the letzte Werter v'chol ha'eda, on the last words v'chol ha'eda. Chol ha'eda Pesach HaMoed, which would mean like this: Moshe Elazar und Nisim bebeis hamedrash hayu. Moshe and Nisim, they were in Beis Hamedrash. Und the Shailas b'nei Slavchot is gefragt geworden by ze Alaman zugleich, and that was asked by them equally, as we explained in Parshas Bahal Loisom. Kederech HaShailas was very gefragt b'beis hamedrash in a similar way, as questions are presented in a Beis Medrash. Kinis Kalil, as we explained before, everybody is lifnei Moshe, lifnei Elazar, and at the same time, while they were in the Beis Medrash, is called the Pesach Oyel Moed. The entire community was standing by the entrance to the Oyel Moed in a matzav shel ha'kohola, in a situation of gathering together. So heron to hear was vet zayin that entfer tainas b'nei Slavchot. What's going to be the response to the argument of the daughters of Slavchot? But that's something which is difficult to split the pasuk into these parts. So that's why it's only the second shot, not the first shot. This is very difficult to split the pasuk. As Moshe Elazar Hanisim in the beginning of the pasuk Zanig and in Beis Hamedrash, they were sitting in this study hall. The Chol Ha'eda and the entire community Zanig Gishtanen, Pesach Oyel Moed, were standing in the entrance of Moed. That's a doich. The Diber bringt Rashi als dem Pirush Horishon Vayikri. That's where Rashi brings the first commentary, the main one, Saris Zamikro, that you swap around the posik. And those was their posik zokt lifnei Moshe v'lifnei Elazar HaKohen v'lifnei Hanisim. All the lifneis, which means that each one was asked separately, is say gefragt achar zeh. They were taka asked separately because it came one followed the other. But we're switching around. No, the Seder HaShailis is verkehrt with the Seder in Pasuk. The order of the question is other than it says in the Pasuk that they asked first by the Nisim, and then they asked Elazar, and then they asked Moshe. Was loyd and Pirush Kumtois, as called Divrei HaKosuv Zanek Kipshutim. So everything is the Pasuk is literally, Lifnei first, then the other. And the Schwerigkeit is blows in them, was their posik is Mishana them say that the difficulty is in the fact that the posik changes the order from the Nisholim, from those that were asked. First says Moshe, and then Elazar, then the Nesiim. So Rashi would rather go with that difficulty than to explain that Moshe, Elazar, and the Nesiim, there was Pesach Oyel Moyed, and they were not sitting in Beis Medrash. It was a place of gathering. So essentially, that's why Rashi brings these opinions, because this is something which is a general approach that between Rabbi Yoshi and Abu Chanan, whether we would quickly change the pasuk order in order to fit in more pshat, or to fit into to squeeze the pasuk, even though, but not to say to swap around the psukim. Zion, and das is euch der Tam. This is also the reason was Rashi is making the zwei perushim b'shem Omram, that Rashi quotes these two commentary by using the name who said them. He brings down the authors, which is Rabbi Yoshi of Abu Chanan. So Mad gives out to emphasize as the zwei deyes, the zu taichen the person, that these two opinions who differ how to translate the pasuk. Simizol zogan, whether you should say sadis es mikra, swap around the pasuk, as in the ein on the selben pasuk, that in one same verse on the verte nichtstein, I'll say that the words are not written in order. Is that the better approach? Oder as is beser zu doichig sein in pirush hakosov, but it's or we're better to squeeze into the meaning of the pasuk. Vitzu zogun saris hamikra, better than saying to swap around the pasuk. So that whole view is a general view, not just in this Rashi. Is nit nor benegei to the pasuk, nor does this alishitosi become mekoyim. This follows the view in many places. Svisha Rabbi Yoshia and Abu Chanan. This is the differ between Rabbi Yoshia and Abu Chanan in general in other places. We find in many places as Rabbi Yoshia Zokt, he says Saris as Hamikra. He doesn't care to swap the words. When Shitas Abu Chanan is the view of Abu Chanan is a medarfa rangin in adoichek in Pirush HaKsumim. We should better go into a real squeezing in the meaning of the pasuk. Aber needs zogun Saris as Hamikra, but really we should try not to say Saris Hamikra. So, Apikol anal oischas, bet men euch verstehen, was Rashi bavorot ni dieselbe Scheile bei Perusha bei Parshas Mekoshes. Why Rashi does not answer this same question in his commentary on the portion of the Mekoshes. Over there, Rashi leaves it blank. And the Rebbe will explain over there, really, Rashi doesn't have to explain it at all, because it wasn't even a question of what to do with him. It's just there was a question what kind of misa. Apikol anal, but it's so about as the kashi by state in them was in Homzer gewonnen mit der Scheile in Halacha euch zu Arn Kulu. The question consists in the fact that the Yidden turned with a question in Halacha also to Aaron. Why would they turn to Aaron? If Moshe didn't know, that would be the question the Mekoshes Eitzim. Nochem fragen by Moshe Rabbeinu. After asking Moshe, why go to Aaron? Is thus in Parshas HaMekoshes Kinkashinik. That would not be a problem in the portion of Mekoshes. Rashi says, Loi hoyu yoidim eze misa yomus. They didn't know with which kind of death will he die. They did know one who desecrates the Shabbos gets the death penalty. Thus haste, which means Azeir bringen him to Moshe va'arim v'chol ha'idon. So why did they bring them a koishish to Moshe and Aaron, the communities? Beikir given, mainly it was nit l'shem shaila in halacha. That wasn't for asking a question in the halacha. They came to give him, to place him into the care of the tzibur, that they should incarcerate, do whatever they need to do to him. As their tzibur, so that this community should fulfill the punishment that he gets, the death penalty. So what kind of a death does he get? That needs to be found out by the tzibur. The Meile is nicht schwer, so therefore it's not difficult for was mir vergleicht Arim v'chol ha'ida to Moshe. Why are we equating the whole Aaron and the whole community of Moshe? Here we're talking about giving over to the possession of the tzibur, Moshe v'Aaron v'chol ha'ida. So it's not like we're going to anybody beforehand and then going to the other one. We're just trying to hold on to the Mekoshish Eitzim until we can find out what will be done with him. And the Rebbe explains another aspect now. Tes al pizeh. But man verstehen noch an Inyan hadoymela. Now we understand another aspect which is similar to what we just discussed, that the Mekoshes was given over to find out, to hold on to him, to take him into custody. In the Parshas Mekalel, the Parshas Emer, in the portion of Emer, in the Chukmash Vayikra, over there we have the story of the one who was Mekalel, he cursed. State in Pasik, Vayaviu Yisrael Moshe. But there it says, they brought him to Moshe, nor to Moshe and Alain, only to Moshe. In a move on, it is not understood. We say, Rashi says that the Mekoshesh and the Mekalel, that they were in the same period of time. The one that was collecting the wood and the one that cursed were in one period of time. The Rashi Zogdor, as Rashi says there, is farvos by Mekalel is the avo given or to Moshe. So how come by the one that cursed he was just brought to Moshe? And by the Mekoshes to Moshe v'Aaron, by the one who collected the wood and Shabbos, they brought him also Moshe and Chol. But Valpi Hanal is moving. Based on the above, that here it was to incarcerate him. So therefore, this was everybody's, as opposed to there, they needed to figure out what to do with him. Rashi Zok Dorton. Rashi says that Yodim Hoyu Shamakoshish B'Misa, that they knew that he gets the death penalty. But they were not specified what kind of misa. But when the one who cursed, he says, Lifresh Lohem, to actually articulate to them what his status is. They didn't know what to do with the Makalal. They didn't know whether he's obligated misa or not. Thus haste by the Makalal is given an inyan for Nashayli in halacha. There was a question in halacha. Whether he's liable for the death penalty or not. His mubon is understood as mandavzich ben Moshe Rabbeinu, that we have to ask Moshe Rabbeinu because he is the one that's going to tell us what the halacha is. Mashenki by Mekoshish, we just said, because Yodim Hoyu as it is Chayim Misa. They knew that he was liable for Misa. The Riber is Beiker nor given. Therefore, mainly it was only this as the Hovnam Chayim Misa gebracht to them tzibur. They brought the one who's guilty of death to the community, which is Moshe Aaron Chol Ha'eda, Moshe and the whole community, and there was no need over here to explain. Rashi doesn't have to explain who comes first and how would we know. This wasn't about knowing, about finding out halacha. This was bringing him into the custody till they find out what to do. Yud. When Yeina Teresh of Pirush Rashi, this is the wine of Pirush Rashi. The Tam Pnimi, the inner reason of us Rashi bring the Pirush and Davke by the Parsha Pesach Sheni Parshas Benois Lovchot. Rashi brings this commentary specifically by the portion of Pesach Sheni and the Benois Lovchot, nit the Parshas Mekosh Sheitzim, and not during the portion of Mekosh Sheitzim. Yesh Loimar, we can say about the Teuchim for the Pirushim. Zu dem Eufen, with the Parshas and Gizog, that the content of these commentary, the way we explain it, has a connection to the way the Parsha was said. The Chiddush in the two Parshas is, what is the novelty? What happened in these Parshas of Bahaloischa with the Pesach Sheni and with Slavchot in our Parshas Pinchas? What is this unique specialty over here? Is as that they have been drawn down and they were said milmailo. How did Hashem give that? Through an argument, a complaint, and a request from below. Parshas Pesach Sheni is gekumen der Taine. In Pesach Sheni, in Balo Yisrael, it came through the argument from the Anosh Masharoyu Tmeim, the people that were defiled. Loman Negor Lebil Teakriv. They argued, why should we lose out not to bring the Korban Gun? Und durch Tainus Vakoshes Neislovchat, and in our Parsha, through the argument and the request of those of Slovchat, Loma Yigor Hashem Avinu, why should our name of our father be diminished? Give us a hold a part of the land of Israel. He's talking about Parshas Nachali, so now the portion of inheritance was set. Und das ist euch die Scheiches zwischen die Scheiches zu den zwei Unionen von Saris HaMikra, that one thing that you switch around the pasuk, the Beis HaMedrash show you Yeshu, and the basement and that they were sitting in the Beis Medrash, and they were asked together. While Beida Zayin and Matgish the Cheshivas from Limud HaTorah Al Yidei Hamata, they both emphasize the importance of the Torah study through the people below. Saris says Mikra. Saris and Mikra means what? We have to change the way the Mikra comes. The Mikra Milo is not moving. The verse, as it comes from Hashem, the way Hashem put it, is not understood. It's specifically through the person that studies and he swaps the pasuk, then it comes down openly in understanding. Same thing is with the idea that wasn't Beis Medrash. Limud HaTorah beBeis HaMedrash, learning Torah in the Beis Medrash is madgish. The Mailas Halimud Ha'odam, the emphasizes the advantage of the study of the man, Hamatu, the one who's below. That is Limud HaTorah. Mash'enkin HaKaholo, as opposed to gathering Pesach Moed, but the end of the Moed, Herren Dvar Hashem Ha'idei Moshe, to hear the word of Hashem through Moshe, Hakil Asahom Bishnas Hakil, gathered them, and during the year of Hakil, Herren Dvar Hashem Ha'idei Melech, in which we heard the words of Hashem through the Yotzeba. Vusi is Mudgesh Mailas Hamaila. Over there, it's emphasized the advantage of the above. The Nikolim Zainen Blois Shemim Umekablin Hadvorim. Those who are gathered are just the listeners, and they receive the words. The Beis Medrash, they're studying. They're all of the studying the people are studying over there. Same thing is Saris HaMikra. These, as is Efshar LeBeis HaMedrash B'Chidush, to the extent we say there can't be a study hall, that there should be no novelty, that people chavedim through the discussion with the friends, Veren is Chadash in Yonim, the Torah, there come up new ideas, new matters in Torah. Al derech the dugmas milas Torah shebal peh legabe Torah shebiksav, similar and of the advantage of the oral Torah relative to the written Torah. Torah shebiksav is the Torah is mitzad lemaila. The written Torah is as Torah is from above. Und die Prote hamitzvos seinen nit begolen. The detailed mitzvahs are not open. In Torah shebal peh, but in the oral Torah, werden sie nimshach v'nizgala, they extend, they become revealed to Chigiyas Odom Milmata, through the effort of the person below. These as common yon nischatshu mamash b'Torah shebal peh, to the extent that there's many ideas that were totally came up in the oral Torah. V'rakas mechuho akra, they leaned it on the pasuk. So that's similar to the addition that we get from the study of Torah or from the Saris Mikra to make a difference, that the person adds to the level of Torah the way it's on its own. According to this, we also understand the reason because the Parshas Bahaloischa bringt Rashi blois them Pirush. Why in Bahaloischa Rashi only brings the commentary Sheshneim Yoshim the Beis HaMedrash, when they were both sitting in the Beis HaMedrash. And by Nois Lovchot bringt by the Pirushim, by Nois Lovchot he brings both commentaries. And the Pirush Ikri Saris HaMikra, and the main Pirush is change and swap the posik. The chiluk from Saris HaMikra and Yoshe Beis HaMedrash, the difference between saying that swap the pasuk around the words and sitting in Beis HaMedrash is Saris HaMikra is madgish them seder vider inyan is fashriben in Torah. That emphasizes the order of the matter as it's been written down in the Torah, and we are swapping it. Mashenke Beis HaMedrash is madgit them limud. When the Beis HaMedrash that emphasized the study through which it is renewed. That brings it to be written down. And that brings how the Torah is. And the Riber is the Parshas Pesach Sheni, was the Taina von Loma Negora hot lekula alma giton anayin din. The argument of why should we lose out? So according to all opinions, that has all of it, as you'll see in a minute when Rabbi is saying all opinions. This has told us a new halacha. As is gesagt geworden an Aye Parsha, there was a new portion in the Chumash about the inheritance when there was no sons and only daughters. State that Iker Chidish the Minyan from Yoshim Beis HaMedrash. So the main is sitting in the Beis HaMedrash. The Ort Dinim Veren is Chadish. That's the place where the dinim are renewed. That's it. Mashenkin in Parshas B'nai Slavchot, as opposed to the portion of B'nai Slavchot. Zokt Rashi says as Nis Almo Alocha Mimenu Formation. Over there he had a black. He blacked out. He didn't see. He forgot the halacha for Moshe. Which means this is not a new halacha. The halacha this was been said to Moshe. The oiftu for the B'nai Slavchot is given. And what was the accomplishment of the B'nai Slavchot? Rashi is medayik, as Rashi says very precise. Zochu v'nichtav al yod. They merited, and it was written through them. The ksiva was through them. Saris, just like Saris HaMikra. Say is the halacha nochamol nizgala geworden zu Moshe. Through them, the law was once again revealed to Moshe. Und damos verschrieben geworden in Torah. Then it was written in the Torah. Und der River, therefore, is the Pirush Harishon ve'ikri Saris HaMikra. That you swap the pasuk ados is verschrieben geworden in an Eufun that has been written in a way was is madgish the inyan from avodah samata, which emphasizes the idea of the work below. They are changing in their desaris. Bald ober as is oich do adeya. Also, there's an opinion as oich parshas nachlis is in ganz in this chadish geworden durch b'noi slavchot, that the portion an hour in Pinchas. There is an opinion that also that it entirely became renewed through the b'noi slavchot. Bring the noch Rashi the day from Rabbi Chaim. So Rashi brings also the opinion of Rabbi Chaim as the base medrash or you yoishvim, and therefore they came up with the source because the base medrash is the place where the chiddush comes out. So before it's lekula alma. That's why in Baal Loischa, Rashi brings down just the interpretation that they were together, they were in the base medrash. But over here, the base medrash is only the second day because according to the there's no chiddush over here. It's just this alma halacha, and then he had to write it down. Yud base, and let it be the will. Askishem v'vakoshas, the tainas b'nei slavcha, just as the request and the argument of b'nei slavcha, no lonu achuza, give us an inheritance. This brought down from above the portion of nachlis, v'ikir hu hamaisa. And the main thing, the action, the nesinas nachle Eretz Yisrael bepoil, the actual giving an inheritance, a portion of Eretz Yisrael, practically in actuality to Bnei Slavcha Gorav Slavcha. So Lazoi Zayin B'Yemeinu Eila should also be in our days. Siyum Zman Hagolus, in the end of the time of Golus, as the Bakoshe was even helped in the Ein Bet, that the request that the Yidden continuously request by Meibishtin, as Samach David Avducha Meheiros Atzmiya, quickly sprout your servants David sprouting the Tachzenu Einu B'Shuvcha L'Tzion B'Rachamim. I see when we go back to Tzion with mercy. L'Rabrengen the Geula Hamitis V'Ashlema Yidei Mashiach Tzidkenu. This should bring down the true and complete redemption through Mashiach Tzidkenu. V'Damult V'Yeder Id Habun. Every Yid will then have clearly and openly Zaynachle and Eretz HaKodesh, their portion, the Holy Land. Through them, HaKodesh Baruch Hu Mechalek Lahem Ba'atzmai. Hashem will divide them by Himself, as the Gemara in Baba Basra B'Meida B'Yameinu. Mamish, very quickly in our days. Mamish, this is Mesichas Motzoi Shabbos Parshas Pinchas Tovshin Lamed Ches.